Hi everyone. We are live on Zoom and Facebook. Welcome everyone. This is interpreting the Nazirite, Mishnah Tractate Nazir. This is the sixth and final session of our Sphera series. Thank you for everyone who's been joining us to learn with Rabbi Silber on this topic. This class, along with our other Mishnah offerings, is being taught in memory of Rifka Rosenwein, Zikvana Lebracha. This class today, this Mishnah devotes an entire tractate to the discussion of the Nazir, the biblical Nazirite. In this course, we will discuss how the Mishnah understands the person and institution of Nazir. Our analysis will focus on the Mishnah's interpretation of the relevant biblical texts, alongside discussion of the mishnaic presentation and the role and status of the Nazir. And with that, Rabbi Silber, I understand you have a lot of material for us to cover today, and I'm looking forward to it. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let's begin this is the last session, the study of the Mishnah of Nazir. Of course, the Mishnah Nazir is 9 chapters, and each chapter has several mishnaiot. So obviously, in the 5 weeks so far, we can cover only a fraction of the Mishnah. But I did want to try to get to some of the core issues that the Mishnah both addresses, and Mishnah raises the issue, and the Mishnah takes it some interesting places. Let me just begin. Today will be sort of a summary, in a sense, of what we've done so far, and also to fine-tune some things and to look at a couple of new ideas. Let's begin just in thinking about the Mishnah. Remember, the Mishnah, the first several chapters of the Mishnah deal with language. To become a Nazir, you make a statement. Not just a statement, but in the words of the Torah, Ish o Isha, ki afli lindar neder Nazir. If a man or woman, one would say, pronounces the vow of the Nazirite. So there are two things. First of all, you become a Nazirite by making a neder. That's point number one. And then the Torah has the words ki afli lindar neder Nazir, which is unusual, usually translated as to pronounce. But let's just begin by just reflecting on this for a moment. You become a Nazir by making a statement. The statement is called a neder. And the Tractate Nazir followed the tractate called Nidarim, which is a lengthy tractate. It also deals with taking a neder. So first of all, the idea of a neder itself is very striking. The idea that I can, through my own speech, create something which is actually forbidden, legally, halachically forbidden to me, that's remarkable. One could have argued, look, the Torah is divine, and the divine word binds us, but my word can't bind me. I mean, people should always do what they say they're going to do. But the idea that you actually create something which is called a sur. So, for example, in the case of the Nazir, and the Nazir says, I am a Nazir. So the Nazir is forbidden to drink wine, forbidden to eat grape products, forbidden to come in contact with the dead, forbidden to cut the hair. So you create a set of restrictions based on your speech. And if you violate those restrictions, you're as guilty as violating many of the other Torah prohibitions. That is remarkable. And the Rambam, when he begins his laws of the Nazir in his Mishnah Torah, defines the Nazirite as a Nazir hu min nidrei isur. The Rambam says, what is a Nazir? A Nazir is somebody who takes a vow to make things prohibited upon the Nazir. That's the way the Rambam defined Nazirut, and the Rambam calls it nidrei isur. Now, the Rambam himself points out that when we speak about the word neder Nazir, or any kind of neder, you could take a neder not to drink that glass of milk. Then that glass of milk becomes forbidden to you. You could take a neder, I'm not going to drink someone else's glass of milk, also forbidden. You could take a neder, you can't drink my glass of milk, forbidden for you to drink it. So the point is, I can't forbid you to drink your glass of milk, but you can forbid your property on yourself or the other person. And that's a neder. The Rambam pointed out that the word neder typically has another meaning, and I would say typically has another meaning. When you open up the Torah, and the Torah talks about nidarim, nidreichem or nidvotechem, what the Torah refers to is not when I say the glass of milk is forbidden to me. What the Torah refers to is when I say I dedicate this animal to God's service, what we call hektish. And hektish takes different forms. You can dedicate this animal to be a sacrifice. You can dedicate the flour to be brought as a mincha offering. You can dedicate, according to the Talmud, property to be given to the treasury of hektish. Hektish can own property. It's called bedek habayit. They own property. They use certain things for different reasons, etc. So that's all called a neder. The Rambam says that's called nidrei hekdesh. The Rashbam, by the way, believed that in the Chumash, the word neder always refers to nidrei hekdesh. It's not referred to nidrei isur. That's the Rashbam. But let's leave the Rashbam aside. But forget the Chumash now. In terms of the tradition, the Mishnah, there's nidrei isur and nidrei hekdesh. The Rambam says that Nazir is nidrei isur. It's a combination of different things that I forbid it by myself. I'm forbidden to drink wine. I'm forbidden to come in contact with the dead, etc. And the constellation of that is called Nazirut. That's the Rambam's definition. Now, I mention all of this because when I was beginning to study the Chumash, my impression was that in the Chumash, that's not the way I would have understood the Chumash. I would have understood the Chumash differently. And I believe that within the commentaries on the Torah, one can find a different path. I'm thinking specifically of the Ramban. The Ramban talks about the Nazir. The Ramban, remember, says that when the Torah tells us, Kedoshim to you, be holy, means to go beyond the law. And the Ramban says that the best example is the Nazir. The Nazir takes on additional restrictions, and the Torah calls the Nazir Kadosh. Kadosh. The hair must grow long. Ki Kadoshu Legohav, the Nazir is holy. So it's interesting, one could have argued against the Rambam that actually, when I say I want to be a Nazir, or I am a Nazir, what I'm really saying is something like, I want to dedicate myself to God. I'm saying something like, that animal should be a sacrifice. And in the case of the Nazir says, I should be holy. The sacrifice is you dedicate, you're makdish the animal. That's the language of the Gemara. You're makdish, you're sanctifying the animal. Okay, but maybe a person can sanctify oneself. I want to be kadosh. By that I mean, I want to be a Nazir. Now, the reason I mention this by way of introduction today is because, first of all, we're looking at Nazir. Some of you were with me together with the biblical Nazirite. Now we're looking at the mishnaic Nazirite. And what's interesting is when you study the Mishnah has a very strange order. It has a very strange internal order. But it's sometimes you've got to scratch your head and say, why is this Mishnah here altogether? It seems to have no relevance to the particular tractate. And we know the Mishnah moves in all kinds of directions. But typically there's some connection. Always there's some connection. So now I turn our attention as we begin this morning. To me, I'm in Israel now, so it's almost Chag here. But in any event, let's look at Nazir chapter 5, which is a very interesting Mishnah. We're not going to get into all the details of the Mishnah to work it all out. That would be a whole other shiur. But I simply want to point out something about this Mishnah and another Mishnah in the same chapter. We have a disagreement. In the beginning of chapter 5, it says the following: Beit Shammai Omrim, Hekadesh Ta'ut Hekadesh, Ubeit Hillel Omrim, Eino Hekadesh. Beit Shammai said, one who dedicates something by mistake, Ta'ut, that hekdesh is chal. That hekdesh takes effect. Even though there was a mistake, some error was made, it doesn't matter. According to Beit Shammai, it's still valid. And Beit Hillel, their protagonists, disagree. They say no. If a person declares something to be hekdesh and there was a mistake, a ta'ut, it is not valid. Normally speaking, the word ta'ut is a very important word. It means a mistake. And that, normally speaking, a ta'ut invalidates the thing you want to do. There's an expression, for example, a mekach ta'ut, a mistaken sale. You want to buy something from me, you want to buy some oranges, and you come to the store and you pay me money, I give you a basket, and you go home, and lo and behold, it's not oranges, it's apples. So then you come back to me and you say, there was no, I say, but I sold it to you. You bought it. And you say to me, no, I bought the wrong thing. You sold me a bunch of oranges. I bought apples. So there was no sale. It's invalid. Never happened. That's called the mechach ta'ut. And ta'ut is a fundamental concept, of course, in law, in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, etc. So here we have Beit Shammai saying a very strange thing. Ta'ut is a valid concept every place. When it comes to hektish, this animal should be a sacrifice. So this chair should belong to hektish. Even if you made some kind of error, says Beit Shammai, it still takes effect. Now, the Mishnah gives an example, and then the Talmud, the Gemara, will debate the example, because the Gemara is bothered by this. What in the world could it mean? If you make a flat-out mistake, it's valid. So the Talmud, of course, the Gemara, which deals with the Mishnah, tries to explain the Mishnah in such a way that it conforms with other rules, it conforms with common sense, etc. So let's see what the case the Mishnah gives. Ketzad, what is the case? Amar shar shachar yotzei mibeiti rishon harei hektish. A person said, that's what the Mishnah says. A person says, the first black ox that walks out of my door, that should be hektish. That should take effect. V'yotza lavan. But the animal that walked out was not a black ox, it was a white ox. Beit Shammai omrim hektish. Beit Shammai says that is effective. That ox, that white ox, is hektish. Beit Hillel omrim eino hektish. Beit Hillel says no, that's not hektish because you said black ox. An ox did walk out, but it wasn't black. So for whatever reason, Beit Shammai in this case says it's true that you said black ox, but you also said I want the first ox to walk out of my house to be hektish, and black and white in this case doesn't make a difference. Now the Gemara tries to understand the case and reformulates it in some sense, narrows the scope, etc. And that's not our issue now, though it's a very interesting issue. But I have a different issue. We understand Beit Hillel perfectly well, and Beit Shammai is a great novelty. Our Mishnah contains, as it often does, two different opinions, even though we know that usually we follow Beit Hillel. But I have a different question, which is a very simple question. Why is this Mishnah here altogether? This Mishnah doesn't belong in Tractate Nazir. This Mishnah belongs in one of the tractates that's part of Kodoshim. There are six tractates of Mishnah, six not tractates. There are six Sidarim of the Mishnah, and one of them is Kodshim. There's Zavachim, there's Benachot, there's Arachim, there's Tamura, Kritu, the whole bunch. That's where it belongs. It talks about sacrifices. You dedicate a sacrifice, there was a mistake. Is it valid or not valid? But what's striking is that Mishnah chapter 5 begins with Beit Shammai Omrim, Hektish Ta'ut, Hektish. And it's actually very interesting that that's the first Mishnah of chapter 5. But when you read further in the Mishnah has another quite interesting Mishnah, which is chapter 5, Mishnah number 5. The Mishnah gives cases. Sometimes the cases the Mishnah gives are extremely improbable. But the Mishnah doesn't care about that. What the Mishnah is caring about is the concept. So now we have a very interesting Mishnah. Again, my purpose in just presenting the Mishnah here is not to get to all the details of the Mishnah, but to make a point about Nazir. So chapter 5, Mishnah 1, did not mention Nazir. It says Hegdish Ta'ud, Hegdish. Hegdish means you dedicate an object to the temple, whether it's a sacrifice, whether it's some other object, etc. But now we come to chapter 5, Mishnah number 5, and we have the following case. Hayu mahalchim baderech v'echad ba kinegdan. Says in Mishnah in chapter 5, Mishnah 5, two people were walking on the road, and somebody is coming towards them. Amar echad mehen, hareini nazir shezeh ploni. We'll read the Mishnah as we have it. The Gemara has a possible change of the text, small change of the text. But we'll deal with the Mishnah as we have it in front of us. So one guy says to the other, if that person who's coming is so-and-so, if that's Charlie over there, then I'll be a Nazir. Maybe he means to say, I know it's not Charlie. It looks like Charlie. It can't be Charlie. If that's Charlie, I'm a Nazir. V'yachad amar, but the other person says with him, Hareini Nazir she'ein zeploni. The other guy says, no. If that's not Charlie, then I'm a Nazir. So they say two opposite things. Obviously, here's one thing we do know for sure. The person coming towards them is either Charlie or not Charlie. There's no middle ground over here in this case. Fine. So what happens? So one says I'm a Nazir if it is X, and the other guy says it's a Nazir if I'm not X. Then there's a third person with them. And the third person said, Hareini Nazir shechan mikem Nazir. I'll be a Nazir if one of you two fellows is a Nazir. Now, obviously, one of those two fellows is going to be a Nazir because each one made a conditional, you can make conditional statements. That's what the Mishnah assumes, and other mishnaic as well. Either Charlie is a Nazir or is not a Nazir. And, either he is or he isn't. So the fact of the matter is, one of these people has got to be a Nazir. So the third fellow said, if one of you is a Nazir, I'm a Nazir. Fine. Then there was a fourth fellow with them. And the fourth fellow said, She'ein echad mikem Nazir. I'll be a Nazir if neither of you is a Nazir. Then the third fellow said, I'll be a Nazir, Sheshnechem Nazirim, if both of you are Nazirim. Shekuchem Nazirim, everybody's a Nazir. Beis Shammai omrim kulam Nazirim. According to Beis Shammai, every one of these people that made a stipulation, even though the stipulations are actually logically incommensurate. It can't be. If one guy says, I'm a Nazir if you're both Nazirim, and one guy said, I'm a Nazir if one of you is a Nazir, and one said, I'm a Nazir if neither is a Nazir, then obviously, how could they all be true? Beis Shammai says it makes no difference. Everybody's a Nazir. Because according to Beis Shammai, if I say Hareini Nazir, and then it turns out that on some condition, and the condition turns out to be a mistake or inaccurate, according to this Mishnah, Beis Shammai says it takes effect. So it fits in very well with the first Mishnah in the chapter. Hegdesh ta'ut, according to Beis Shammai, is Hegdesh. And we would say, according to Beis Shammai, Nazir b'ta'ut, or Neder Nazirut b'ta'ut, is also Hegdesh. Beit Hillel says no. The ones that actually turn out to be true, if I say I'm a Nazir, if one of you two is a Nazir, then I will be a Nazir. But if I said I'm a Nazir, if neither is a Nazir, or both, that person would not be a Nazir according to Beit Hillel. That we understand. Beit Shammai is a novelty over here. My point is then, the first point, is that you see from this Mishnah, chapter 5, Mishnah 5, that the Mishnah has an implicit, according to Beit Shammai certainly, an implicit connection between Hekdesh b'ta'ut and Nazir b'ta'ut. So my point is that Beit Shammai seems to look at the neder of the Nazir not as Nidrei Isur, not as someone who's just bringing various prohibitions upon oneself. But Beit Shammai seems to be really saying that when you take a neder to be a Nazir, it's a kind of Nidrei Hekdesh. You're not makdish your animal, but you're makdish yourself. And the Torah does call the Nazir kadosh. Kadosh u'lelohav, the Nazir is kadosh. Beit Hillel, and now Beit Hillel who disagrees may disagree with that concept, or they may actually agree with the concept, but they disagree with its application. They may say that maybe there are parallels between Hekdesh and Nazir, but in each case, Ta'ut is not a factor. If it's mistaken, it never takes effect. We don't deny there might be some connection that conceptually they're linked. We just say that there's no relevance because it doesn't work in either case. So Beit Hillel, you can't tell. And then we have the third opinion. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, he has a third opinion. Ein echad mehem Nazir. Rabbi Tarfon has a third interesting opinion. None of these people is a Nazir. Now we ask ourselves the question, why? Because Rabbi Tarfon's opinion seems to contradict what we generally know. What we generally know in many spheres of halacha, and the Mishnah talks about this at great length in Tractate Kedushin and Tractate Gitin, other tractates as well, a person can make a conditional statement. You can make a statement, I will do X on condition. You could take such a neder. We have many examples in Masechet Darim, someone taking a vow, I will do X if so-and-so. Or in the cases of marriage, in the Mishnah and Kedushin, I will marry you on condition that. And the Gemara says, okay, if the condition is fulfilled, they're married. If the condition is not fulfilled, they are not married. That's called the T'nai. And those statements, the concept of T'nai is a concept that appears throughout the Talmud, throughout the Mishnah. Rabbi Tarfon says Nazir is an exception to the rule. Ein echad mehem Nazir, the Nazirite vow, says Rabbi Tarfon, does not work if it's conditional. Because Rabbi Tarfon is of the opinion that the Nazirite vow, remember we began this morning with the pointing out that when the Torah speaks of the Nazirite vow, it uses a strange language. Isha isha ki yafli lindar. Yafli, not just to take a vow, but yafli, to pronounce it. Rabbi Tarfon understands that it must be precise. The logic of Rabbi Tarfon, the Mishnah usually doesn't tell us the logic of anyone, but Rabbi Tarfon might be thinking along the lines of, to be a Nazir is something exceptional. We'll come back to this later, it's very basic. And in order to create this kind of effect, you need an unconditional statement, a very clear and unconditional statement. So this Mishnah, chapter 5, Mishnah 5, is actually very interesting for two reasons. First of all, because it puts forth Beis Shammai's view of Hekdesh Ta'ut in reference to Nazir, which suggests to us something very basic about what is the Nazir doing when the Nazir takes a vow. Is it about prohibitions, what they call Nidrei Isur, or no? It's about creating something sacred. But in this case, the sacred thing that's being created is actually Nazirut, is the Nazir. That's one thing interesting. And the second interesting thing is Rabbi Tarfon's opinion that requires a kind of explication in Nazir that you don't require anyplace else. When it comes to Nazir, that's different. To create this particular effect, and especially if he holds that what you're doing is, in effect, giving yourself a different status, that can only take effect if it's unequivocal statement. An equivocal statement cannot do that. So that's the first point I wanted to make. Let me stop here now and take any comments or questions, and then we'll get to the last Mishnah of the Tractate and look back at the Tractate and see what the Tractate has emphasized, etc. And raise some of the issues we have discussed. We'll raise again.
All right, Debbie, I see you have a question.
Yeah. So it seems to me that Rabbi Tarfon is saying that it has to be a definitive, declarative statement, and it's not something that you take as you're walking along and saying, well, if it lands odds or evens, it's not something that is decided upon just by chance. It has to be a thought out action because it's a change of behavior. It's a positive. It's not just a abstention from certain behaviors. It's a mindset. It's a mindset.
Right. I would say, we talk about it from maybe the legal language, it's actually not only a change of behavior. It is a change of behavior because you incur certain prohibitions and punishment for violation of the prohibitions. But I would say this ties in with what we had seen earlier in a different Mishnah in chapter 7, where the Mishnah talks about this hypothetical case where Kohen Gadol and a Nazir are walking along the road, and they come in contact, they find this corpse. Which of the two of them should bury that should do the burial? Of course, it's an unburied corpse. You have to bury it. It's called a mate mitzvah. Which of the two should do it? But the implied in the Mishnah, and of course implied in the Torah, is that a Nazir and a Kohen Gadol are sort of on the same plane.
On the same, right.
So it's not even just a change of behavior, I would say. It's a change of status.
Right.
And I'll deal with this later on about change of status, because I think that the Mishnah, at least one of the Mishnah, is actually, in a certain sense, I wouldn't say troubled by this, but finds it very interesting about this change of status, and maybe even troubled is the right word. I think that the Mishnayot in general of these 9 chapters are taking certain positions, but the way the Mishnah typically works is it doesn't stake out its position in a kind of conceptual way. Mishnah gives you cases, and our task when studying the Mishnah is to try to get some sense of what the Mishnah is picking up on in terms of the Torah. Typically, it plays off psukim of the Torah, what it chooses to emphasize, and how it chooses to define it. Because the Mishnah does have agendas in the sense that it has it's trying to put out something. The Tractate of the Mishnah is trying to take something that's familiar to us and trying to define it a certain way, or trying to give us certain parameters. Now remember, the Mishnah never just has one opinion, or not never, but the Mishnah, that's what's remarkable about them. We have 3 opinions in the Mishnah. We have Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, Rabbi Tarfon, and we, generally speaking, follow Beit Hillel. The rules you follow Beit Hillel, again, with some few exceptions. So why is Beit Shammai even here? Why mention them? But in point of fact, there are reasons for it, and we can maybe touch upon that at the end. So I wouldn't say that the Mishnah is giving just one view, but when you read the Mishnah, certainly there's a sort of a mainstream of the Mishnah. But the reason I raise this now is just because it gets back to a very fundamental question about a Nazir, which the Rambam took a strong position on. Rambam took his position that Nazir is a code word for a constellation of prohibitions. Now, I want to make one other point before we jump to the last Mishnah. First of all, does anybody else want to speak up? Happy to hear.
You can ask in chat. It's been pretty quiet in chat, but you can also ask in chat. Speak up.
Let me make another point. You know what, speak up. Let me make another point over here about the constellation of prohibitions. The Mishnah basically is the critical entry point for what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh. I mean, everybody should study the Mishnah, which is why one of the Drisha really is making a big push now on Mishnah in memory of Rifka, but also it's not only in memory of Rifka who studied Mishnah, it's because we feel Mishnah is very important. It's really a gateway text to really help us enter into the world of the Talmud, the world of rabbinic thinking and rabbinic text. Now, in the Mishnah, and the Gemara, of course, picks this up and runs with it, we divide the commandments typically into, there's different ways to divide the commandments. The most basic way is positive commandments and negative commandments. I am saying this here in Israel, it's in a few hours, it's a holiday of Zman Matan Toratenu, and there's some Sephardic Jews have a custom to read the so-called Azharot. What are the Azharot? So the Azharot are poems that were written by various scholars and poets. One of them was Saadia Gaon, for example. And the poem, very brief poem, has hints at, recalls the 613 commandments. So they have it, some have the practice to read this on the holiday of Shavuot, some read it Mincha, these Azharot. So we have positive commandments and negative commandments. When it comes to the Nazir, we know what the negative commandments are. Do not cut your hair, do not drink wine, do not eat grape products, do not come in contact with the dead. But there's also a positive commandment. And the positive commandment is Kadosh Yiyeh, Gadel Pera Sa'arosho. The days of the vow of the Nazir is holy, Kadosh, which is taken by the Talmud to be a positive commandment. It's a mitzvah aseh. Not just you can't do something, but the Nazir is positively is holy. That's what the Ramban picked up. Kadoshim Tiyu. The Nazir is Kadosh. For the Ramban, Kadosh means limiting yourself even more than the halacha does. Limitation, asceticism for the Ramban is part and parcel of what he believes it means to be holy. So the Nazir is both as a negative commandments, but also have the positive commandments. And what's striking is that when it comes to the positive commandment of being kadosh, that the Torah says, Gadel Peras Arosho, he should let his hair grow long. The hair of the Nazir may not be cut, but not just can't be cut, it has to grow long, which is why we saw earlier in the Mishnah that if somebody got a haircut 10 days before the vow is over, you have to keep another 30 days. Because let your hair grow long for the Mishnah is 30 days. So you always have to, you can't complete the vow till you have a 30-day growth of hair. And the Torah connects that to the positive side of Nazirut. We'll come back to this in a minute. But I wanted to jump ahead now to the very last Mishnah of Nazir. And we'll have some final comments about what the Mishnah is doing over here. The last Mishnah of Nazir, the very last Mishnah, is the following. This is chapter 9, Mishnah number 5. Then after we do this Mishnah, we'll go back and want to make another couple of points about the Nazir. And the Nazir as that emerges from the Mishnah. The last Mishnah says the following. Nazir haya Shmuel. Says the Mishnah. Shmuel the great prophet, Shmuel of the book of Samuel, was a Nazir. He was a Nazir. Kedivrei Rabbi Nahorai, which follows the view of Rabbi Nahorai. Rabbi Nahorai is a Tana that is quoted by the Mishnah in the Gemara. His name means light, right? Sometimes he's associated and sometimes with Rabbi Meir, whose name also means light. But anyway, let's assume Rabbi Nahorai and Rabbi Meir are not the same person. Rabbi Nahorai says, "Shenemar umora lo yaleh al rosho." When Chana took her vow in the first chapter of Shmuel, she was praying for a child. She says, "God, if you give me a child, I will dedicate the child to God." Umora lo yaleh al rosho. What does that mean? Umora lo yaleh al rosho. So Rabbi Nahorai says, "Nemar b'Shimshon." It says when it comes to Shimshon, umorah, the word morah, the angel said to Mrs. Manoach, morah lo yaleh al rosho, and no morah shall be on his head, which typically be translated as a razor. And therefore, since in the case of Shimshon, man morah, what do we know about the word morah? Ha-murah b'Shimshon. That is stated in reference to Shimshon. Nazir refers to the fact that Shimshon is a Nazir. Av morah ha-murah b'Shmuel Nazir. So Rabbi Arai says, when Chana said, umorah lo yaleh al rosho, what that means, says Rabbi Arai, is that Chana was taking a vow Chana's taking a vow that her son will be a Nazir. We remember in the Mishnah, the Mishnah said earlier, Ha'av ma'adiret b'no b'Nazir. The father can impose the Nazirite vow upon his son, but the mother can't, which is very strange given the fact that in the Tanakh, the one who imposes the Nazirite vow upon the son, and as the last Mishnah itself here says, the Mishnah references Chana. Chana said, my son will be, Chana says that Shmuel will be Morah or Rosho, and that's parallel, says the Mishnah, to Shimshon. So the one who did place the vow of Nazirut upon her child was in fact Chana. But the Mishnah says women no, men yes. Different conversation, actually a very interesting one. But anyway, the view of the Mishnah, the last Mishnah, is that Shmuel was a Nazir. It's actually very interesting. This is the view of Rabbi Nahorai. Because when we started the Tractate, the very beginning of the Tractate, it talks about if a person makes a statement, and then one of the examples the Mishnah gives is if someone said, I want to be like Shimshon, I want to be like the son of Manoach, I want to be the one that Delilah cut his hair, Delilah's husband, or whatever. That person is a Nazir Shimshon. That not just a Nazir, but a Nazir Shimshon. That Shimshon could never cut his hair, ever. Couldn't even lighten up on the hair. Shimshon was allowed to come in contact with the dead, etc. So there's a concept according to the Mishnah of a Nazir Shimshon. It's a different kind of Nazirut. Then there's another kind of Nazir that's alluded to in the beginning of the Tractate, called a Nazir Olam, a lifetime Nazir. And then it said the lifetime Nazir can take a haircut periodically to lighten up the hair. The one who does that in the Tanakh is Avshalom. So Avshalom is in a way hinted at that Avshalom is also a Nazir. Doesn't mention Shmuel. Till you come to the last Mishnah, says Rabbi Nahorai, Shmuel was a Nazir because it says, no razor shall cut his hair, Morah. And the interpretation of Morah is a razor. Just as we see with Shimshon, when the angel said to Mrs. Manoach that your son will be a Nazir, Umorah lo yaleh rosho, and no razor shall touch his hair. That's the view of Rabbi Nahorai. Omar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi says no. V'yalo ein morah elashel basar v'dam. Rabbi Yossi says that the word morah does not refer to razor in cutting hair. Morah is related to the word fear. Now, even though the word morah is written mem vav resh hey, and the word morah related to the word yareh is typically mem vav resh aleph. Nonetheless, says Rabbi Yossi, okay, it's usually written mem vav resh aleph, but over here it's written mem vav resh hey. We have that, okay, but it means she wasn't saying my son will be a Nazir. And when you read the story of Shmuel in the book of Samuel, one does not get the sense that technically he's a Nazir. Okay, Rabbi Nahorai claimed yes. Says Rabbi Yossi, no, Chana didn't mean that. Chana meant my son will not be afraid of people. My son may be a God-fearing person, but my son will not be afraid of people. That was Chana's prayer. I'll dedicate my child to you, and he will be fearless. So Amar Rabbi Nahorai. So Rabbi Nahorai responded to Rabbi Yossi. Amar Rabbi Nahorai. V'lo kfar nemar. Vayom Shmuel ech elech b'shema she'ul v'aragani. Shekvar haya alav mora shel basar v'dam. So Rabbi Nahorai says, very interesting. This is the end of the Masechta. Says, what do you mean Shmuel had no fear of people? We know Shmuel did have fear of people. Because after they have the incident with Amalek in chapter 15 of Samuel, 1 Samuel, God says to Shmuel, go to the house of Yishai, house of Jesse. There's somebody in that house I want to appoint the king. I want to make the king. And Shmuel says to God, how could I go? If I go to the house of Yishai and make someone else king, King Saul will find out and he will kill me. So you see, says Rabbi Nahorai, that Samuel was afraid of people. So therefore, we're saying that Chana's prayer didn't come true? No, Chana's prayer must have come true. So Chana could not be saying he won't be afraid of people because we know he was. She must be saying something else. No razor shall cut his hair. Morah doesn't mean fear. It means razor. It's actually interesting that Shmuel, and it's out of character for Shmuel, when God says, go to the house of Yishai and appoint a king, and Shmuel, who's just told Saul he won't be the king anymore, he says, listen, if I go, he'll kill me. And one can read that, I think, not necessarily as a matter of fear. He presents it that way. When you study the book of Shmuel, one might have a different impression, namely, that what he doesn't want to replace Saul. He may be unhappy with Saul, but Saul and Samuel have a relationship. Saul is Samuel's protege, maybe failed protege, but protege. The new king is totally autonomous, has nothing to do with Shmuel. Maybe that's the reason. In any event, we're not studying the book of Shmuel now, which is a worthy enterprise, but the last Mishnah brings up Shmuel. I just want to say a couple of things about this and then to reflect upon something else that we looked at last week in terms of the Nazir and its place within the Mishnah. Because remember, Nazir is one tractate within a Seder that's called the Seder of Nashim that deals with relationship with women. Yes, it does speak to the men in relationship to women. That is the way the Mishnah is set up. Patriarchal in that sense, there's no question about it. But in any event, deals with marriage, divorce, etc. And the tractates of Nidarim and Nazir and Sota are also found in Seder Nashim. So first of all, let me just say that first impressions and last impressions are very important. So when you start with Shimshon in the Mishnah, I think is problematic. First of all, the Mishnah I claim is bothered by Shimshon because Shimshon's lifestyle is certainly different from a standard normative healthy lifestyle of a committed Jew. He doesn't live amongst the Jews. He's busy sleeping around with the Philistine women. So what kind of model is this? Okay, when we studied the biblical Nazir, we spoke about this at some length, but it is curious that the tractate ends with Shmuel, as if to say the tractate is saying, listen, this Shimshon, Avshalom was certainly problematic, who's hinted at in the beginning of the tractate. But let's leave on a different note. You can be a Nazir and be a holy person. Holy person. This is the great prophet Samuel. Samuel was a Nazir. By the way, I wanted to mention something in terms of Shimshon and Avshalom, which touches upon something that I mentioned last week. When you say in the Mishnah, one of the most interesting things, the Mishnah is interesting for 100 reasons, but one of them is the order, the Seder. The Mishnah has the strangest order. Now, in this case, the Tractate Nazir comes right before Tractate Sota. In the Torah, the parsha of Nazir in the Torah comes right after Sota. Sota's chapter 5. Actually, this week in Israel, we're going to be reading that parsha, but in the States, you won't, because you have a second day Shavuot. But in Israel, it's only one day. In Shabbat, they're going to read Nazir this Shabbat in Israel. So Nazir follows Sota. In the order of the Mishnah, Sota follows Nazir. When you look at the Tractate Sota, in the first chapter of Sota, the Mishnah has a kind of, Mishnah has some kind of Agadah in the first chapter. Some Mishnah generally doesn't have too much Agadah, but Sota has. And one of the Mishnah, the famous Mishnah in the first chapter of Sota is, B'midah she'adam moded modedim lo. Measure for measure. What people do gets paid back in kind, both positively and negatively. And they give examples of people acting negatively who got paid back in kind, and they give examples of people who acted positively and got paid back in kind. So the negative ones that the Mishnah mentions are two people, Shimshon and Avshalom. Shimshon straight after his eyes. At the end of the day, the Philistines took out his eyes, eyeless in Gaza. So it's interesting that Shimshon and Avshalom are mentioned in the Mishnah in Sota, in chapter 1, as the two paradigmatic examples of someone who misbehaves and gets paid back in kind. And these are the two people that are held up in the beginning of Tractate Nazir as Nazirim. The people who acted positively and repaid in kind were Miriam for watching Moshe. People wait for her later on. She's watching Moshe. Moshe who takes Joseph's bones. God buries Moshe. So that's another one. So there's, and Moshe is buried by God. So there's Miriam. There's Miriam and Moshe are the two there that, I think there's a third as well. Miriam and Moshe are, and Yosef. Yosef was kind to the brothers, and then Moshe Yosef buries his father. Yosef buries Yaakov, and then Moshe takes Yosef back. So there's negative, but the negative ones are Avshalom and Shimshon. That's very striking. The two Nazirim in the beginning of Tractate Nazir. So the tractate ends with Shmuel. The Mishnah wants to end on a positive note. You always want to be positive, and it's positive to be a Nazir and to be a holy person. We think of Samuel as the great prophet, as the Navi, but he's also, says the Mishnah, the Nazir, and he's the Nazir for life. Because Hannah said, my son will be a Nazir, and that's before he was even born. She dedicates him as a Nazir prior to birth. So he's a Nazir for life. It's not as short. Fine. Now, I just wanted to, let me stop you for a minute. We have 15 minutes left. Does anybody have comments or questions? And then I just wanted to make some final comments about the tractate. And something that I think that's interesting in the tractate. You look for anomalies. Now, again, remember, we touched upon a few mishnaiot in this 9-chapter tractate, but try to get at some of the core ideas of the Nazir. Let me make the following observation in conclusion, and then I'll take any comments or questions. One of the things we noticed in the last chapters of Nazir, the Mishnah, in fact, the next to last Mishnah, which is not about the Nazir, but it starts with Kosafek Nigaim Batchilat Tahar. The Mishnah seems to have a bit of a focus, not a bit, a focus on issues of Safek. Safek means when you don't know something. There's a doubt. There was a remarkable halacha that we looked at in the Mishnah Most people don't know this halacha exists, okay, but we saw it in the Mishnah called tumat hatahom. In other words, if the Nazir comes in contact with the dead, then the Nazir starts all over again. Bring sacrifices, wait for 7 days, and then wait for 7 days, bring sacrifices, then you start all over again. Cut your hair and you start over again. What about if you came in contact with a corpse, but at the time you did it, you didn't realize that there was a corpse there, nor did anybody else know it. So if someone else knew there's a corpse there and you didn't, and you found out later, it makes no difference. You have to start over again. But if nobody knew about it, that's called tumat hatahom, a tumah of the deep. Later you find a corpse. The corpse was buried deep under the ground. No one in the world knew about it. Then there's a special law when it comes to Nazir that the Nazir does not have to start over again. It's a remarkable law. And it goes counter to what we normally assume. You found out later. Okay, you found out, but at the time you were tamei. Start over again. In that context of having doubt, the Mishnah talks about different cases of doubt. And in fact, what the Mishnah does sometimes, it brings in other cases, nothing to do with Nazir. For example, next to last Mishnah in Tractate Nazir, which is chapter 9, Mishnah 4, has the following case. Hamakeh et chaveiro, just right before the Shmuel Mishnah. If someone hit one's friend, v'yamduhu l'mita, it's the very end of Mishnah Dalet, chapter 9, Mishnah 4, the very end. So the person was beaten, and then the question, and the amdu l'mita, the court is looking, the doctors are called in, this person is not going to survive. The person will die of the wounds. Doesn't die the same day, but in 1 week, the person will die of those wounds. Vehekel mimash tehaya. But then, the person got better. So the person got better. And then the person got worse and died. So the Mishnah says chayav. The person says that Mishnah says, according to the first view, the one who hit him is culpable for murder. Yes, there was an interim period where the person got better. But we know it. But the cause of death was the beating that the person took from the other guy. Rabbi Nechemia omer patur. Rabbi Nechemia disagrees. Sheraglayim l'davar. Right. Now here, raglayim l'davar is a very important phrase, very important expression. I mentioned last week that the term raglayim l'davar is most known for the law of the sota. That the sota who disregard the husband's warning and the witnesses saying don't hang out with X. And then she hung out with X. And one witness says she slept with X, just one witness. Normally one's not enough. But the Gemara says we believe the one witness. She doesn't drink the water. She leaves the husband. She's not punished, but marriage is over. We believe the witness because raglayim l'davar. But the term means that it has what to stand on. It has what to stand on, raglayim l'davar. So here, the Talmud disputes what does raglayim l'davar mean in this Mishnah. Does it go back to the first opinion? Person is guilty because obviously that was the cause of death, or does it mean the opposite? Rabbi Nechemia says part 2, because the person got better, then you can't say that it was a consequence of the initial beating. Maybe in some indirect way the consequence, but that in any event, my point is that the Mishnah of Nazir brings in the question of safek, and a lot of the mishnaiot in Nazir deal with questions of doubt, of safek. So I just wanted to have I've been thinking about this a lot the last couple of days, sort of a kind of reflection upon the Nazir. I'm not sure that's what the Mishnah is getting at. It could be not so, but it's an interesting idea I want to put out there. And that is the following thought. When we think about the mishnayot that we have seen, maybe the 10 or 12 mishnayot we saw, and I picked out certain mishnayot and for a reason. And one of the things that we saw, and this actually appears twice in Tractate Nazir, unusual that I mentioned it twice. 4 words, Stam Nazirut Shloshim Yom. If a person says, I'm a Nazir, it's limited to 30 days. 30 days. Person didn't say 30 days. If I say I'm a Nazir, you would say you're a Nazir for life. No, if I'm a Nazir, that means 30 days. The default is always 30 days. And what that means is that the way the Mishnah presents the Nazir, there are exceptions. You can say I'm a Nazir for 100 days. You can say I'm a Nazir forever, a Nazir Olam. But those are unusual situations. The default is 30 days. And to me, what that means is, if I say I'm a Nazir for 30 days, what I'm really saying is, I'm not a Nazir. And the Mishnah is bothered by this idea. I'm a Nazir. I'm a high priest. You're not a high priest. You're a simple Israelite, not a high priest. But for 30 days, I'm a high priest. And now the question is, those 30 days where I'm a high priest, am I really a high priest? Or do we say something different? That I'm not a high priest. I can't determine I'm a Kohen Gadol. You're born a Kohen. You can't become a Kohen. You can take on certain attitudes and behaviors of a Kohen. But effectively, what it comes down to is, you are a Yisrael who is behaving like a high priest. That's what it comes down to. You can't actually make yourself. Yes, the Torah called you Kadosh. Yes, it has a sacrificial side to it. But another way to look at it is that you are simultaneously two different things. You are a Kohen Gadol in a certain respect. And on the other hand, you're a plain Israelite. And I was thinking about this in terms of the idea of safek. Safek means, usually, we don't know. You have two pieces of meat lying in the street. One is kosher, one is not kosher. The Mishnah deals with this elsewhere. And what do? If you have a doubt? May you eat a piece of meat? It's a safek. So then we have all kinds of discussions, wide-ranging discussions, what you do in case of doubt. That's a doubt where you don't know. There's another kind of safek. Actually, Rabbi Soloveitchik, this concept appears in the commentaries on Tractate Eruvin, but Rabbi Soloveitchik took this concept and applied it elsewhere in very ingenious ways. There's another kind of safek, not a safek where you don't know, but a safek where there are two opposites which coincide. Rabbi Soloveitchik, tried to apply this to the concept we call Ben Hashmashot, to twilight. It's not he argued that twilight, you don't know whether it's day or night, but rather twilight is both day and night. And the suffix emerges from the fact that something is both. And that's another kind of suffix. So I was thinking about this, he didn't say this, but I was thinking about this in terms of the Nazir. At the end of the day, the Nazir is somebody he's not a high priest. He's not a high priest. And in fact, maybe the Mishnah is even bothered by the idea that someone can wake up one morning and say, I'm a Kohen Gadol. What do you mean you're a Kohen Gadol? You're not a Kohen Gadol. You're from the tribe of Zevulun. You're a simple person. What do you mean you're a Kohen Gadol? But the Torah permits it. Torah legitimizes it. The Torah permits it. The Torah has a whole procedure. And maybe what the Mishnah is, maybe troubled by this, and maybe what the Mishnah is really saying is, it's limited. The Torah limited it. The Torah spends a lot of time on the conclusion, but the Mishnah really limits it. It's just 30 days. Not 100 days. It's not 10 years. You can do that, but the default is, in fact, 30 days. Default is it's limited in time. And at the same time, you're both. You're a holy person. You're the holiest of holies, but you're also the plain person. And I was thinking about this of being a holy person, because and I'll just conclude with this thought. We looked at the Mishnah, we looked at chapter 6, the first Mishnah. Shlosha minim b'Nazir. There are 3 prohibitions of the Nazir. There's the cutting hair, there's the contact with the dead, there's the drinking wine, grape products. Those are the 3 prohibitions. And the question that we raised implicitly, we could spend a lot more time on it, of these 3, which is the key. The Mishnah already, remember the Mishnah said, each one has a leniency and a stringency. Wine, you always can't drink wine. There's no exceptions. Contact with the dead, there are exceptions. If you see a corpse, a mitzvah, you're allowed to come and you have an obligation even to defile yourself and to bury the dead. Can you cut your hair? You can't cut your hair. Sometimes you can cut your hair. If you happen to be a mitzorah, and the mitzorah process of purification requires cutting hair twice, you can do that. Each one has a leniency. On the other hand, Tumah is very severe, says the Mishnah. If you become Tamei Meit, you have to start all over again. Cutting hair, also severe, but you have to start all over again, 30 days. Drinking wine doesn't affect the Nazirut vow at all. So each one, the Mishnah already in chapter 6, I was just thinking about, in terms of, what do we really think? What if we have to pick up which of the things, which of the Nazirite prohibitions is the most central? So I'll just say in 2 minutes the following thought, that actually the last Mishnah in the Tractate, Samuel was a Nazir. And you say to yourself, Samuel was a Nazir. There's not one shred of evidence that Samuel's a Nazir. But his mother had said, Umara lo yaleh al rosho, which Rabbi Nazirite says means he can't take a haircut. No razor shall cut his hair, the same as Shimshon. The other reading says, no, he shall not be afraid of anybody. That's the Targum on that pasuk, says that he shall have no fear. So, but what demonstrates the fact that Samuel is a Nazir? He doesn't cut his hair. And not cutting your hair, actually, in the Torah, I mentioned this before, is not just something that you're not allowed to do. But the Torah says the Nazir is holy. Gadel peras rosho, let his hair grow long. So the point of the hair then becomes not just what you may not do, but the letting the hair grow long is a sign and a symbol of actually who you are. When we think, for example, of the great biblical Nazirite of Shimshon, yes, the Mishnah tries to sideline him. But at the end of the day, the Shimshon story revolves around his hair. That's the source of his strength. The source of his strength is not cutting his hair, because the hair represents his connection to God and to God alone. The Nazir actually is connected to God and God alone, to the exclusion. Shimshon doesn't live amongst the Jews, and then he lives amongst the Philistines. His whole life is with the Philistines. That's part of probably what bothers the Mishnah. And now we come to the last Mishnah of the Tractate. Says the Mishnah, Nazir haya Shmuel. Shmuel is different. He was a Nazir. And Shmuel doesn't live apart. He's a part in a certain sense. He's a Moses figure. On the other hand, he spends his whole life teaching and judging. He would circulate. He was a traveling teacher, traveling itinerant preacher. He would travel around from one place to the next till he came home. So you have someone who on one hand is totally dedicated to God, and on the other hand, he dwells amongst the people. He lives amongst the people. And even the last statement is interesting from this. They said to Rabbi Nazirite, you said no razor shall cut his hair. They said, but we don't think it means that. We think it means he shouldn't be afraid of anybody. And the last words of the Tractate are, what do you mean? He was afraid. Shmuel was afraid of Shaul. Shmuel was afraid to go. Shmuel was dedicated to God, yes, but he was also very human on the other side, as the Mishnah presents him, with all the fears and troubles and worries that everybody has. He couldn't just pick up and go. So the fact is that perhaps that what the Mishnah, which is a precursor to Sota is all about suffix. That's what the Tractate Sota is about. This woman is married to X, but can she stay with X? Did she have an affair? Didn't she have an affair? We don't know. There's no proof. Then you have this ritual of the Sota, unusual ritual of the Sota, kind of miracle ritual of the Sota. They have no other place. That's how the Tractate begins. The Tractate Sota ends with the last chapter is about if you find a corpse and no one knows who killed the person. Egla Rufa, the closest city measures. You have a doubt. Lo no doubt, we don't know. What do we do in a world that we don't know? That's the subject of the Sota. But the way the Mishnah is ordered, the last mishnaiot of Nazir are an introduction to the next tractate, both in terms of Shmuel versus Avshalom and Shimshon on one hand, and also in terms of the suffix. The suffix Sota is a person who has possibly betrayed the husband, defiled herself, etc. The suffix Nazir is different. The suffix there is the two sides as the regular person, who functions as a regular human being within the community, and the other side of it is the holy one, the sacred one, the kadosh. It's also a kind of suffix. Anyway, in conclusion, I wanted to say that I enjoyed studying with all of you, and I think that the study of Mishnah is something that is a very worthwhile project to take on. Study Mishnah. It is it's more accessible than the Daf Yomi, and it gives you a scope about beginning to see how the oral tradition is picking up pieces of the Torah and the directions that it's taking it. So Drisha will have later in the year a big project in memory of Rivka to start the study of Mishnah Yomi. We're going to try to work this out with people helping all along, and I'm looking forward to that project. I wish everybody a Chag Sameach and a Shabbat Shalom.
David, can I ask you something?
Yes.
Just as you were speaking just now, it dawned on me that the comparison between Shmuel and Shimshon, that Shimshon lived and moved around among the Plishtim and was not among the people and did not care for them and stayed far away, whereas Shmuel lived with Bnei Israel and moved around among them and taught them. He was the real shepherd. He tended to them. He stayed on their side and moved there, while Shimshon was the total opposite. You know, as you were speaking, that just became in high contrast.
Yeah, that was, I think, right. We're talking along the same lines. The book of Shmuel makes exactly this point, that Shmuel had a circuit. He would actually have a circuit. He would go from here to there, and then he would return home. He actually had a real circuit. He would go around traveling to different cities to be a shofet, to be a teacher, to be a religious. Actually, even when Saul meets Shimshon, he meets him in a different city. Doesn't mean him in his home city, but this guy's traveling to all the cities, which is kind of itinerant preacher. So Shmuel is, yes, he circulates around, but he circulates amongst the people. So that's how the Mishnah anyway presents. The last Mishnah of Tractate Nazir was a shocker in a certain sense, of surprise, you know. We have a different Nazir, not just Shimshon, not just Avshalom. We have a different one, the prophet Shmuel. All right, then.
Thank you so
very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was so inspiring, and it's captivating. You present it so well, and you give so much. I can't wait to learn with you again, and all my gratitude.
All right.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach, everyone. Please keep an eye out for our emails and for our website for more learning opportunities coming up after Memorial Day and after Shavuos. Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach. Take care.